Take a seat.
Now I'd like to open questions to the floor. When you ask your question, please state your name and where you're from.
Good afternoon, Mr. Blair. My name is Willis. I'm a undergraduate student from the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and the University Scholars Program. My question is, some may argue that the secular nature of international aid organizations and charities, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, might be more effective in administering aid and acquiring both public and governmental funding. How different and effective would faith-based organizations be in addressing concerns of the poor from all religions, given fears of a modern-day extension of religious colonialism, especially in developing countries?
Well, I think that's a very good point. I mean, first of all, the work that people like the Gates Foundation, the Soros Foundation, and others do in Africa is fantastic work. It doesn't mean to say, however, that there can't also be great work done by those faiths that are religious in motivation or in inspiration. And what I find in the work, and I do work in Africa, is that very often those people who are most close to the local community on the ground are those people in the faith communities. And if they become, rather than looking at themselves in terms of their difference, if they become, as it were, interested in implementing their essential religiosity through their compassion towards other people, and actually, if you look at the main religions, what's interesting about it is that, I mean, how many of the main religions have this concept at their heart, which is to love your neighbor as yourself? I mean, it is actually in all the major religions that essential feeling is there. So I think that provided that religious faith is expressing itself in compassionate social and human action, then religious faith really can play a major role and often can partner those organizations of a more secular nature. Where I agree is if the purpose of the faith activity is simply, as it were, to take people for their religion in exclusion to the other. But that's why I say in all of this, those two facets of religion, the positive and the less positive, are always present.
Good afternoon, Mr. Blair. My name is Natalia Tuhill. I'm from the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and the University Scholars Program here in NUS. My question is related to the media. Given the power of the media in the information age that we live in, what is your take on government intervention, regulation, and censorship of religious content and portrayals versus the freedom of speech concept within democratic ideals? Thank you.
I would say my basic starting point is I'm in favor of freedom of speech, okay? That's my basic starting point. But I think there can be circumstances in which it is sensible not to allow people to provoke religious hatred and division. Now, how you shape up that line, or how you draw that line properly and how you shape the debate around it is very, very difficult. But one thing I'm sure of is that if there is an active government desire to promote interfaith, you've got a better chance of allowing both freedom of speech and religious coexistence. The most difficult thing is where there is, that there is a sense that either the state is trying to protect one religion as against others, or alternatively, they just want to censor people. Now, I think what is interesting about Singapore, for example, is that you took up the issue here of religious interfaith really a long time before other people did. It's one of the reasons why I was so keen to come here, because right from the very beginning in Singapore, people were aware of this problem. But you also had to guard against those who wanted to provoke religious hatred. So in my view, for example, in the West, we've almost gone too far the other way sometimes. Now, this is a very difficult thing for me to say, but let me say it to you because it's what I honestly believe. Just before I left being Prime Minister, I was very keen to introduce some order into what was being preached often in some of the mosques of a very radical nature, and which I actually felt was going to be a problem, a real source of division for the country. Now, some people said to me, well, it's freedom of speech, they should be able to say whatever they want to say. Whereas my view was that that's true as a matter of general principle, but if you get to a situation where what is being preached is actually designed to foment sectarianism, then it has a consequence that is really very dangerous. So I think this is a tough question, and I think my way of, in a sense, saying, well, in the end you've got to try and draw the line, is to say whichever society you live in, it can't be worse if you've got that religious interfaith notion that is allowing people to explore their common ground and to learn about each other and to be more comfortable with each other's faith. And, you know, it's a fascinating thing with religious faith, because all of us in our own faith, we take for granted our own rituals. And so, you know, for Christians sometimes they find it very odd to see how a Muslim will pray, or, you know, in Jerusalem you hear every early morning, you know, then we're seen calling people to prayer and all the rest of it. And it's for a Christian, that's a very different thing. But on the other hand, you then look at the Christian rituals in church and, you know, the robes and the incense and everything, and someone from the outside could say, well, that's a pretty strange way of you guys. You know what I mean? So a lot of it is actually, and then when you actually, I was addressing a group of Christian people in a school in the UK not so long ago, and I started to point out that in the Quran, of course, Jesus is revered as a prophet, and the Islam is immensely respectful of the position of Jesus Christ. And they were saying to me, no, but surely the Muslims are against us because we're the Christians. You know, so there's a lot of misunderstanding, and if you take away some of those misunderstandings, you've got a far better chance of people then getting together. But what you can't do, I think, with the sensitivity of religion is just say anything goes.
You talked about this idea of the idea of reconciliation. The trouble with the opposing views is that they're normally seen, a lot of faiths are seen as mutually exclusive. So, for example, the exclusive salvation, that yes, ultimately one way, the way, leads to heaven and eternal life and all that. So in that situation, where do you reconcile these two ideas? Because ultimately then people have different motives, therefore also different goals, and they figure that maybe perhaps the Christian may feel that the Muslim doing this alongside me may be doing it for altruistic and perhaps praiseworthy motives, but ultimately his motives aren't going to lead to the same, they're not going to have the same result, because he's not going to get salvation and I will. In that situation, how do you reconcile it? Especially since people start believing that talks about interfaith dialogue, globalization, all end up watering down these fundamental differences that are essential parts of faith, in which salvation is seen as exclusive. Christians believe that, Muslims believe that, and Jews believe that too. I can think of other religions, but these are the three main Abrahamic religions that do believe in the exclusivity of their own salvation.
Yeah, well, this is, I mean, you can reconcile it, or you can actually resolve it, of course, would be the other alternative. I mean, when I was in Davos recently, you know, the World Economic Forum, the interesting thing about the world economy and how bad it is that when we have a panel on the future of capitalism, you know, you got heads of the banks and big business, and then at the end nowadays you usually have a preacher of some sort. You know, that's how bad it's got. They decided to call in the religious cavalry, but we did a major session like that, and then we did a second thing, which was we did a little panel discussion with me and four clerics, a rabbi, an imam, evangelical, and a Buddhist, actually. And here's the interesting thing, because we had a very good discussion and everything, and then I thought, well, let's throw in a little bit of a difficult one at the end, because I was supposed to be moderating the discussion. And so I said to them, there's two people. One is a practicing member of your religious faith. The other is a person who's not of your religious faith. The person not of your religious faith is doing great work. They're dedicating their life to helping other people. But they're not of your religion. Are they on the path to salvation or not? And what was absolutely fascinating, I thought, was that all the people on the panel instantly became politicians. And I can spot it because I'm one. So they were sort of working around it. And what was interesting was the audience, of course, had no difficulty answering that question at all. Well, the person does really good work, that's fantastic. But why should they not be saved? But so my view is that some of this is often to do with the fact that I think organized religion sometimes feels very uncomfortable with answering these questions. But actually, if you go out to ordinary people, they don't really find any difficulty answering that question at all. And you can even put it in a more absurd way. You've got someone who's absolutely devout, but actually doesn't do anything very much with that. And what is, if you read the Quran or the Bible, you read any of the sayings of the Buddha, you read the Torah, it's all about one recurrent theme in all of them are people who are devout on the surface, but don't actually implement in action their compassion for their fellow human being. And in each case, it's that is condemned as an insufficient obedience to the essence of that faith. So, it's really all there. Some of this actually is about rediscovering what the thing's supposed to be about. But, you're right, it is very difficult. Except that I think in action with people, it becomes less and less difficult. That they find a way, not of reconciling it, but actually of resolving it.
My question is, in this very extraordinary times of this world today, whether in fact there should be a repositioning of how we look at faith and intercivilizational dialogue. I'm a believer in intercivilizational dialogue, and I have great faith in the upside of globalization. But if you look at the world today, Muslims tend to think that the most critical issue is Middle East. But to me as a Muslim, I think the most critical issue for Muslims is to look into themselves first. Get their fundamentals right, get their knowledge base, get their technology, get their development in place, then they will get a lot more respect and they'll be better placed to face the challenges of today. So I'd like to ask you this question, Mr. Blair. In the context of the Gaza conference, reconciliation, and the Middle East problem, don't you think the Muslims are also losing sight of the real issue, which is actually, yes, Middle East is very critical in terms of double standards they worry about, in terms of the question about faith and respect for each other. But I think there's a lot more the Muslim world can benefit from in terms of the world, the Western world, in terms of technology, in terms of knowledge, in terms of cooperation. And this is something which I think they should not hold themselves to ransom by Middle East issue. Middle East issue will take a long, long time to settle. But more important, they should get their act together, get their cooperation and their relationship with the rest of the world on good footing so that they can move forward together and benefit from the upside of globalization and faith. Thank you.
I think that's pretty good. I totally agree with you. And I've just add one thing, which is that actually I think that for many people in the Middle East and for many of the leaders there, what they want to do is, in a sense, partly to get the issue to do with Israel-Palestine resolved so that it stops being the focal point of their relationship with the rest of the world, because I think they know in the end, yes, that has to be resolved and so it should be. But in the end, it is often used as an excuse for people not taking the action to make sure that Islam takes its rightful place in the 21st century. So I agree with that, and let's hope in the course of the not too long into the future we can make some progress on both.
Thank you, Mr. Zainal, for that point. I think it's a great way on which to close this conversation. So on this note, ladies and gentlemen, please do join me in thanking the Right Honourable Mr. Tony Blair for a wonderful session today.
Take a seat.